Welcome to the Sky Talk Doc podcast, where we navigate life, relationships, and everything in between with thought-provoking curiosity and a touch of grace. Buckle up, Buttercup. This is a flight you won't forget. I am really excited to share something that has honestly been such a game changer for me during a time when I truly needed some extra support. I've been feeling the weight of stress and life, and I could see it showing up in my overall health and well-being. For the past few weeks, I've been using bioactive peptides, and holy buckets, guys, I have improved mental clarity, focus, and I'm finally getting some more restful sleep. If you've been struggling with brain fog, low energy, skin health, and that last little bit of weight, or getting really good sleep, this might be worth looking into. And of course, you know, I don't add products to my health and wellness routine without doing significant research. When I saw what Make Wellness was doing and their evidence-backed science, I had to give it a try. I also followed it up with my own personal mini case study using dry blood analysis, and the proof was in the pudding. I have now partnered with Make Wellness to bring you their bioactive peptide products with a special Sky Talk Doc promo code that you can find in the show notes. As always, consult with your provider before making medical decisions. This should not replace medical advice. Good morning, Deanna. I am so excited to have you on because we're going to talk about fascia today, which is definitely one of my most favorite topics. I feel so stuck right now. So I'm super excited to kind of hear some of the tips and techniques and tricks. And what's ironic is I had started following you on Instagram way before your team reached out. And so this was just like so synergistic. It was one of those moments where I was like, I know her. Like I watch her in my, so it was so perfect. And I'm really just geeking out on kind of hearing everything behind the scenes on how you got into what you're doing. And I know you're changing lives with this movement therapy stuff that you're doing in terms of like all of the stuckness that we find ourselves in. So can you share with the listeners a little bit about your story and what you're doing?
Yeah. So 25 plus years ago now, in my 20s at the time, I was training to be an athletic therapist and working with professional athletes. And I was doing the work that I was teaching others and working with. Yet the harder I was working with my own body, the worse things were getting. I was becoming more compressed, more congested, more toxic, 50 pounds overweight. And I mean, I was dieting. I'm working out like a crazy woman. And yet the harder I worked, the worse my health and my life became, which was just so frustrating because now you feel like you're in failure mode all the time. So at the age of 30, I made some big changes in my life, and that resulted in having some pretty severe anxiety attacks. But it was this one anxiety attack that created the seed of information that was really the foundation for what I've built. In the moment, I actually thought I was going to die because I was so trapped in my fear. I couldn't catch my breath. For some reason, I intuitively dove my hand into my belly, and the first thing I encountered was pain, but the pain brought me out of my crazy brain back into my body. I knew I was breathing. I knew I was alive. And so I started intuitively exploring in my belly, which, by the way, I never touched because that was where I carried all of my size. And I was so ashamed of it. I just hated the way I felt in through there. So now I've got my hands moving into this tissue. And as I started exploring, what I noticed with my hands was it was marbled with what felt like scar tissue, even though I hadn't had any injury or surgery in that area. As an athletic therapist, I focused primarily on deep tissue work. So I was really good with my hands and finding it. But now here I am in my own tissue, and I'm blown away that it was just so marbled. But it caused me to understand why all of the efforts I was putting into my body were failing, because there was no blood flow getting to this tissue. So that first evening, I spent maybe 30, 45 minutes just working with my hands in the area. And what was so notable was how calm I felt, which was so not typical for my normal state of being. I woke up the next day a little tender from what I had done, but I was calm all day. So I was super excited to get home that night and go back in. And after that second night of doing the work, when I stood up, I felt taller. And I went and I looked at myself in the mirror, and my belly was flatter than it had looked in years. And I mean, there was times when I was doing 400 sit-ups a day. I was training to do half marathons. I was doing Taebo, aerobics, weights in the gym, like all of it. And it was just getting me nowhere. So in 2 days, to have such a remarkable change was so exciting. This became my daily practice when I came home from working on patients. Within 2 weeks, my chronic low back pain was going away. My neck pain was improving. But most important, I was excited about my future, probably for the first time since I'd been a kid. That was the seed of everything to come with what I've done.
You know what's fascinating too? I remember doing Billy Blink's Tae Bo. I loved that. I love those kinds of workouts. I feel like that works for me. But I know that the body is a lot of electricity and a lot of fluid, right? It's all a river. So in the process of the demarbling, how do like if you were to give some information to someone to explain that? So for example, everybody on this podcast now knows that I had a seatbelt injury from a really bad rear end collision. And I can feel it. I can feel it like knotted up in there. And it's really created a lot of angst and pain and sleeping issues and kind of all of that. So sometimes I think we can even be afraid to work an area like that we're going to mess it up worse, right? Like, ooh, I don't want to touch that, that's hurting me. And so maybe I should just leave it alone. How do you recommend that people start to explore these areas of their body and even maybe identify what parts of their body need movement? I mean, obviously, we've got the obvious ones, right? Our neck and shoulders, we all can kind of feel the crunchiness in there from sitting on the computer and things like that. But what about some of these other maybe lymphatic areas and things like that that people just don't really know about and aren't sure how to touch or move?
So, if I may, I'm going to just quickly talk about how I see fascia and
Yeah.
then talk about how I see trauma affecting the fascia system and
Okay.
then what we can do about that. Sorry, what
And
you were
real
going to say?
quickly, we have emotional trauma and we have physical trauma. So I feel like that's really important too, because
Yeah.
I know for me right now, with what I've got going on in my life, I'm feeling like just kind of all of this weird tension in here. And I know it's communication, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not feeling like I'm being heard. And it's creating a lot of tension in my body.
Right.
I've been going into these environments, high stress environments where you get 15 seconds to speak and oftentimes you're completely disregarded, and I find it becoming like anger that's stored. I swear it's like, you know.
Oh,
So
yeah.
talk to me about that too. Yeah, the difference between the physical and the emotional traumas.
So, first of all, the way I see fascia, it's literally the cell membrane of every cell interconnecting every other cell. So, it's the communication system in the body, and it's composed of a lot of things, but primarily two proteins, collagen and elastin. When these proteins are in balance, what we have is optimal space in and around every cell. And the reason that's important, space allows for ease of flow of nutrients in, as well as the removal of toxins, debris, even negative emotion away from the cell. And if that's the case, where there's ease of flow allows ease of life. Now, the challenge is that's nobody's reality. We're under this constant force of gravity. We're dominant on one side. Depending on how we use our body every day, are we stuck in front of a computer for hours a day? Are we physical laborers? Do we play sports? Do we play instruments? What's our background? Are we like hyper stressed all the time? All of these things create the scenario that we have in the moment, and then we pattern in our fascia. So, what happens to the collagen component, because we are designed to be upright, as we start tipping off balance, and this is generally a slow moving system over time, the collagen starts to migrate to areas of need. It's the structural protein. The elastin is the protein that allows mobility in the body. And again, when in balance, we've got this really great structure that can move, but is solid in form. So as the collagen starts to migrate to areas of need, it creates blockages to flow. So now we're getting cells starving and dirty. And this really comes back to trauma. I call it TIP. Trauma induces programming and patterning. So at anywhere along the way, and we all have, little traumas, big traumas, we have them throughout life continually. But they start, and what happens to the body is initially we end up holding the breath because that's our initial
Mhm.
response to pain, fear, and stress,
Mhm.
whether
Mhm.
it's physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, or spiritual pain. The body goes into that reaction mode of holding the breath.
Mhm. Mhm.
Unlike a deer who survives an attack that shakes to move that negative energy out, we end up locking in that
Mhm.
alignment and then aging from that perspective. So let's say you're 5 years old and you witness something terrifying. You witness a murder or any kind of abuse. Now that is locked into your brain as your program.
Mhm.
And now, because we've contracted in the core, we're no longer aligned. So then we have to pattern in our limbs so that we don't tip over.
Mhm.
So it's the collagen, again, that starts to migrate to pattern us to keep us upright. But it creates an imbalance in the limbs, and that impacts how we breathe. So
Right.
if we're not breathing properly, we're not properly feeding the cells. And we also have a body that's sluggish with lymph. So
Mhm.
we end up again getting frozen and stagnant in these patterns. And over time, if we don't correct them, the grooves deepen, deepen, deepen. And then we also accumulate more trauma, as you're sharing right now, how you're going through something that's making you angry. So we get tense.
Mhm.
So the whole thing is that what we want to do is we want to start at the patterning. We want to work from the limbs to bring the core of the body back into balance so we can get that breath back. And once we start changing how we breathe, now we can start reprogramming our mind so we're no longer seeing the world from that lens of trauma that began a long time ago. And it's emotional, it's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual. So it all gets tied together.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting whenever I'm under high stress and my body's like fighting off a little cold or a virus, it goes right to the weakest spots. Like it's really wild. I mean, it's almost like instantly it's like, oh, that's that hamstring injury from when I was in high school, or that's when, when I tripped over that root when I was camping and, you know, hiking and my ankle's sore there. It's really interesting how it seems to kind of attack those really weak areas. But as you were talking, I was actually thinking about how recently I started doing something called shockwave therapy, which is really painful, but it's also really healing in terms of what's going on with my shoulder. And one of the things that they always use as a benchmark to know when you've really hit the deepest pain is because you hold your breath. You almost immediately just, and then they have to say, breathe, breathe, breathe. Like they have to actually remind you, which it's kind of interesting when you think about how autonomic breathing is, that we will go to such a lock everything down state when you're in that kind of pain. It's really interesting. Um, and for me, I have a super like my vasovagal response is just insane. So I'm practically like a fainting goat. Like it just kind of whoop. But I'm very in tune to my emergency response, especially when it comes to emotional trauma, because that's what my book's all about. It's about when we become activated with a threat from our partner. And these wounds formulate very young in childhood, and then they become these narratives we carry throughout life. And so it's kind of fascinating how you're saying all this is tied together, right? The physical injuries that we've experienced because they're a trauma, the hot stove emotional moments that we've experienced in our lifetime, they're all intertwined and connected. And I do find it fascinating that it stores deep in the tissues. Um, and creates these blockages. One of the questions that I have, because I've noticed this, and this is not to judge, this is just simply something I've noticed. People seem to be carrying a lot more cellulite. And I'm curious, is that, in your opinion, from the extensive traumas that we've had, maybe emotional stresses that we've been experiencing more as a general population lately? Or is that more about the environmental toxins that we're ingesting? Like, what's your thoughts on that? I'm sure cellulite's a big topic with the work you do.
Yeah, it is a big topic. And what's interesting about cellulite, so energy moves in waves and spirals. There's no straight lines in nature. And we as women, we have a greater Q angle so that we can have babies. So what
Mhm.
happens to, especially when we're looking at the lower body, when we look at the feet, and when I'm doing an assessment on somebody, I always go right down to the feet because there's always going to be one foot that's driving away from the body like a flat tire. The opposite side anchors to stop you from tipping over. As we start pulling the body away from balance, the adhesions twist and grip onto anything in its pathway, including bone, with that spiral pattern. That's what's creating the dimpling, the
Like a
cellulite.
corkscrew
Exactly.
into a
Now,
cork.
yes, and because especially now, so it really starts with the foundation of the breath. There's three parts to my work. One is creating the space we've lost through time. We become shorter and wider as we age. We want to put the
Mhm.
space back into the body that time has taken away. The second pillar is the most important one in my view. It's the breathing. It's moving blood and oxygen into these newly created spaces. And then the third pillar is understanding proper postural foundation so we don't continue to fall into these negative alignments. So when I'm looking at a foot or at feet, there's always going to, again, be that one flat tire causing the other one to anchor. So now the tibia bone has migrated on the foot. So now we can't dorsiflex properly when we're stepping. So there's going to be a rotation to how we walk. That rotation is pulling us down faster, 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 creating the spiraling, creating the cellulite. It starts though with the breath. And I'm 56 years old. So my generation, I was really late in the game, but I didn't have a computer until I was an adult. You get these parents today, parents that are 20, 30 years old that grew up in front of computers or with technology. There's less space in their belly to grow a healthy baby. So now the babies are coming out with more of a compromised breath. So now they don't have a diaphragm functioning properly. So they're already twisted before they're even mobile.
No.
And then they start being mobile, and then gravity accentuates their issues. So they're already starting with a greater twist. And this is exactly why. Plus, we're more toxic. So that's absolutely part of the equation too. The more toxic we are, the more sluggish our lymph is. But yes, I see there's only going to be increased everything negative as time goes on, largely because our form, our structure has become so negatively impacted by so many things. But the container itself, to me, is the biggest reason. If we don't have that breath moving the waste out of the way and feeding life into cells, then we start like a balloon that is deflated. Our body is deflating faster and storing the debris and the dirt more readily from a younger age.
Golly, that's like pretty devastating news. And then as you're talking, I'm even thinking about how, we don't move the tissue in our face enough even to get the breath in properly. I mean, I feel like there's so many mouth breathers and things like that, and we don't hold our tongue in the right spot. It's like, how did we get so far away from what infants naturally know how to do, which is breathe and scream and express, to this
Yeah.
kind of like, it's, something that seems like it should be just inherent, but it's been so trained improperly over the way that we live our lives. And so what is like the number? I mean, you're saying breath, but I think a lot of people don't even know what that means, really.
Well, and they don't. And here's the reason, because that collagen protein, as it migrates, it will grip and adhere to anything in its pathway, including bone, with a 2,000 pound per square inch force. That's incredible to think that we are that strongly held out of alignment. And because the rib cage, the diaphragm muscle, the breathing muscle, is the foundation of the rib cage. So when it's working properly, when we inhale, it moves down. When we exhale, it lifts. If we have a proper core alignment, this muscle is working optimally to make sure all of the cells are properly fed and clean. However, that's not our reality. If you look at the kids today, they are so collapsed because, again, they're
Mhm.
starting with technology when they're like sometimes 2 years old. I'm seeing kids with phones. So
Right,
they're
right,
not hanging from trees and playing like we used to.
right.
They're sitting in front of their games or their phones, and they're always compressed. So now their breath is compromised from such a young age. They're really limiting the amount of oxygen as they're going through the developmental phases, and they're becoming more toxic. So even in the rib cage, we will have these adhesions locking the diaphragm from function, kind of like having a frozen shoulder. Most people have a frozen diaphragm. And you can have a fully frozen shoulder, or you might have 90 degrees range of motion. Same with the diaphragm. We'll have variations of how much of it we can use. But the kids today, they're growing up with so much less of that muscle at their fingertips, essentially, to utilize this muscle to properly develop, to properly live. We can't sleep without a proper function of the diaphragm because we're not getting that oxygen to the brain. We can't do anything. Well, physiologically, it's like they're different animals. And when I work on them, their bodies, their tissue is older than older people. I
Wow.
believe this is the first time in human history when the young people will not live past the older generations. Now,
Yeah.
there's a solution, which is lovely, but we got to get people to the block. I mean, there's other things that people need to do, but the work I've created is all about fascia decompression. It gets you back to learning how to use your body the way it was intended to be driven, but we weren't given instructions. And the youth are coming out, the kids are coming out in such a different physiological space from the get go that they're having struggles. And then again, we're in a very toxic world on top of all of that.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm just completely tracking everything you're saying, and I'm even thinking about the adhesion. So with my shoulder, the one particular adhesion, I mean, it literally felt, when they were working it initially, it literally felt like you were breaking something in my arm to work through that stuckness. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I would say, I feel like if I push it, I'm gonna injure it further, that I'm gonna cause, problems. And he's like, no, that pain is where you need to push a little bit further, not as in injure yourself, but we tend to protect it. when we feel it, we stop. And so this is something physical that we can feel, but what you're describing in the diaphragm is not something that people would necessarily have awareness of or be able to realize. And if the body is going to react the way it does in the shoulder, I feel the pain, I stop the push, I'm not going to
Yeah.
push through that adhesion. They literally hook my arm up to a machine that pushes the arm to the point where it hurts and then twists and push further. And I would not naturally do that, right? Like I'm going to protect that and go, no, it hurts, stop. So if people have that same kind of blockage or adhesions in their diaphragm, they don't necessarily know is even there. The body is
Right.
going to protect that space. So
Yeah.
how do you mechanically work the body into pushing through that when some people don't even know it exists?
So, and with reference to your shoulder, we don't force. We use persuasion versus force, and it comes through melting, not breaking. So, our tools here, I've got 3 tools. We've got the Block Buddy, the Block Baby. These are the tools that we basically have for our starter program and our membership. And then I've got the Block Paddle. We started this with our facelifter program, but we can use this throughout the entire body. And these are made of wood. And the
Okay.
reason they're made of wood is because bone and wood are similar in density, and those
Okay.
adhesions will grip to bone with that 2,000 pounds per square inch force. So if you're using something like a fascia roller as an example and you're rolling on the surface, you'll improve flow to the surface tissue, but we need to get to the root of the issue. So regarding your shoulder, there's going to be a whole bunch of cause sites to the pain.
Hmm.
So when we work block therapy, we work the whole body. And what's nice about it is we aren't forcing anything. We are melting because pressure over time. So we use the tool everywhere in the body, but we always start our classes on the belly, working right on the belly button where you're lying on it and you're
Oh,
instructed how to breathe into it. And you're in control because you're the one doing all the work. So we
uh-huh.
do this lying down. You can do it in bed, and pressure overrides pain. So the pressure fibers are larger in diameter than the pain fibers. So once you connect in with your breath, the
Yep.
sensation changes and you're in control. And there's only 2 rules in block therapy. Number one is your breath is your guide. As
Yep.
long as you're breathing in a relaxed way, you're feeding and healing blood and oxygen into the spaces. The second one is we want to stay for a minimum of 3 minutes because we can't rush melting. So that's the lovely part. We can address the body from a distance to where the pain is because everything is interconnected. So even between your fingers, you can work between your fingers because your hands and your feet are literally the furthest from your engine, your diaphragm.
Uh-huh.
This is where we get anchored into those negative alignments most significantly. So you can work all you want on your shoulder, but if you don't release the alignment of the hand, that internal rotation is going to keep pulling that shoulder
Uh-huh.
back into that negative alignment.
Yeah.
Not on top of that, how we walk also creates the negative alignment up the chain. So you can start with your feet and create changes to the upper body. And it's amazing because I had a 30-day lower body program. The changes to the alignment in people's rib cage, their face, the lift of their jaw without even touching anywhere from belly button up was unbelievable. And that's the lovely piece because if there's areas that people are scared to work with. Say you've had a crazy concussion, you don't want to go and pummel the head after you've had a
Right.
concussion. We can address the concussion from a distance until we get enough heat and energy flow and lymph moving away that we can then approach the head from a very different perspective than when we begin. And that's the nice thing. We do this very safely, and it's always your breath is your guide. You're the one in control.
Definitely experienced in doing a lot of yoga and things like this, the deepening when you're working with the breath. So when you're breathing through it very slowly, you almost feel something release. It's like
Yeah.
a sinking sensation. Like there we just
Yeah.
went deeper and we didn't have to force anything, it was just breathing through it and slowly that tension just kind of releases, which is pretty impressive. So you mentioned the block on the stomach, and I literally clenched thinking
I saw
about
that.
how that must like at initially that must be so counterintuitive because I feel like it's such a protective space, especially for women who have had children, right? Like it feels like no, that's an off limits zone. I remember the first
Well, and
time
that
that
was how I felt before my anxiety attack. I never touched my belly because,
yes,
again, that was where I stored all of my weight. I was ashamed of it. It was toxic. It
yeah.
was constipated. I mean, it was just something you just abhorred, essentially.
Yes, the
But
bloating area, right? Like all of
yeah,
that. I remember the first time that my partner, kissed my stomach and I was like, like it's just one of the I mean, and I don't think my stomach is bad by any means, but it's definitely like an off limits zone. So it feels the idea of working that and putting a block there feels kind of like scary to me.
But actually what it's so lovely because as again, you're starting to allow that internal pressure and you're in control of how fast and how much. It's like you're giving the cells that are deeper than what you're consciously aware of a hug.
Oh,
You're allowing those deeper cells to be heard, to have their voice. And as you do that and you start melting through the layers of adhesion, now you're getting again that movement of the lymph. So you're pulling away the toxins that's largely creating a lot of that internal pressure. And now you're getting blood and oxygen into those deeper layers so that you can start awakening the cells that have been pushed away from our consciousness. And that's what happens with trauma. Essentially, like, especially like if it's been an abuse to the body somewhere. You want to keep it over there, right?
yeah,
And
right.
those adhesions literally guard us or keep us away from the connection to those cells, but they're still there. So now we're slugging around these cells, but they're not part of the equation of how we function in our lives. We want to integrate every single cell in our body to do their job. Whereas, wherever we're starting from now, maybe we only have 10 or 20% of our cells really working on our behalf because if the diaphragm is locked away, and it's only working 10, 20%, which means if you're an upper chest breather, you're not pulling the air deeply enough into your lungs to reach where the majority of the oxygen receptor sites are. When we breathe diaphragmatically, we feed the body 600% more oxygen. That's a ton.
Well,
And
and when
every
we're
cell,
thinking
first and
about
foremost, needs oxygen to thrive. So again, if we're like, because that's like that upper chest breath that's become so chronic to the majority of people because of repeated trauma, they're literally in survival mode. And I mean, how many times have we heard, oh, we're only using 10% of our brain? I believe it's because we're only using 10% of our ability to breathe optimally. So when we change the breath, we change everything.
when we think about ozone therapy, free radicals, antioxidants, right? Like all of these different things, it all ties into oxygen. I remember the hydrogen peroxide therapy. I mean, we've had a lot of ozone type topics on this podcast, and it makes sense to me that the oxygen is not getting in there and doing the filtration work that it needs to do. So one of the things that I struggle with is, these when I'm excited about a program, but the online, I really struggle with that sometimes. I know a lot of the listeners have the same experience. How do you encourage people to work through these online programs that can be so beneficial, but it's like, I'll just scroll Instagram instead. That's not an issue for me. But I mean, in general with people, right? Like instead of putting it on a program and actually working through it and then trying to watch it while you're doing it, like how do you encourage people fundamentally go through your program?
So, first of all, it's really simple to do. It's incredibly profound in the benefits, very simple to do because you do it lying down. And that's the lovely thing. Even if you just do the very first position on the belly, you start turning on your parasympathetic nervous system. You go into that rest and digest almost immediately, and you start to feel the benefits right away. But most importantly, we have such a beautiful community that's highly engaged. I get on twice a month with people that are in my membership to get on live calls. I get on once a month with anybody that wants. My community, I've got a Facebook community of almost 25,000 members now it's very highly engaged. So there's so many ways of being part of the community. We have challenges. We just finished our 21-day facelifter challenge. You would not believe the befores and afters.
I
They
need
are
to do
truly
it.
phenomenal, yeah. Well, even at like today, we're having a live call to go over the 5 winners, the changes in 21
What?
days,
When are you
the
doing that
shape
one?
of
I
their
need that one.
skull. Yeah, it's fascinating, and that's with our tool, the paddle.
I
I
bet it
actually
feels
teach people
so
to get
good.
right inside their nose with their
Oh,
fingers, high up as you can, and you melt those adhesions to bring symmetry to the nostrils.
oh my
We work
gosh.
in the eyes to get to all of those adhesions that have sunk in under the orbit of the eye and creating displaced eyes and all of the bags and the wrinkles and all the things that we see that we don't like. We address this in this program. It's fantastic. And it's a
Well, look
full
at
body
your face. I
program.
believe it. 56
Thank you.
guys. I don't know if you're watching this on YouTube or listening, but she is proof in the pudding. I'm looking at it with my own eyes.
Thank you. So, and the thing is, we make it simple. And because it's so simple and the benefits are so fast, I think that's one of the reasons people engage. But I think the reason most people try it and then stick with it is because of that sense of peace and calm that is almost immediate when you dive into the practice. And then it's this knowing that you have this. You don't need to look outside of yourself for the answers. The answers are all within you. We just need to learn the language of the cell. So we teach people how to understand the value of the pain signal. It's like the baby crying. It's not something to push away and mask or avoid. It's something to move through. And when you do, the consequences are so beautiful and continual. Like, it doesn't end. I'm 26 years now into this journey. And I mean, if you saw me when I was in my 20s, I don't think I'd be alive today with where I was headed. But I keep uncovering more of my past to pull it
Wow.
up and to let it go so I can be more present in the moment. And that's what's so exciting about it. The gifts never end if you make this a lifestyle. And that's what people do. Once you get on it, it becomes a lifestyle. And we have a free gift for your listeners if they want to give it a try immediately using a rolled up towel. It's pretty efficient.
Wow, this is impressive. I love this. So where can the listeners find you? Where's the best place for them to go?
So blocktherapy.com is my website. Also on YouTube, I've got tons and tons of free video, lots of information there. And then if you happen to be on Facebook, my community it's free for anybody to join. It's a private community though called Block Therapy Community.
That's fantastic. And the listeners know we always put everything in the show notes. This has been spectacular. I'm really intrigued by the blocks because I've used cork and I've used foam, but it makes sense that it is near composition to the bone. So I love this wood idea. I'm also kind of a geek on natural things. I feel like there's so much to that. So I love this. Thank you so much, Deanna, for coming on and sharing. I have endless questions, but I know we talked before this video. I'm a little on the sleepy side today, so not my 100% self, but I'd love to have you back on. Maybe after I do the facelift program, I'd love to get in there with that. When are you running your next
Happy to
facelift
send it to you
program?
and you can give it a try. And I'd love to get on the other side.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. When are you doing the next one? Or is it continuous?
It's continuous. You can join anytime.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. So listeners, check her out, blocktherapy.com. She's got tons of content on Instagram, YouTube, and this community on Facebook. Thank you so much, Deanna.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
The views expressed in this podcast aren't necessarily those of the Sky Talk Doc. They're here to challenge your thinking and inspire growth. Until next time, blue skies and tailwinds.